You are listening to the Black Jezebel Podcast, where we dismantle respectability politics and discuss its effects on Black women's everyday lives. I'm your host, TemaraToday, and I've studied Black women's sexuality for over a decade. You may be wondering, why the Black Jezebel? Well, historically, Jezebel has been a controlling image used to represent Black women's sexuality as hypersexualized and deviant. Even today, its lasting effects impact our relationships, our mental health, and our God given human right to pleasure. This stops now. Your erotic energy is your power. Let's reclaim it.
Welcome back. This is your host, Tamara, today. And y'all, it has been way too long. I am actually coming to you on our 2-year anniversary of the official launch of the Black Jezebel podcast. Can you believe it has been 2 years? Well, I can. It's been almost a year since we have last talked about a conversation with the Black Jezebel. So, on this anniversary, I wanted to come out and launch season 3, and we are here. And I am so excited to jump into this season with you all. I cannot wait till you hear the conversations that we're going to be talking about. Season 3 is going to be focused on healing. And oh my God, are we going to have some conversations about healing in the Black community, healing about sexual trauma, healing about many different forms of healing and what it looks like. And so I only felt it necessary and important that we started off season 3, episode 1, kind of diving into my own healing journey and what's that look like and what this last year has been, because it's been crazy. So, I wanted to jump in and fill you guys in, because you know how I feel about transparency, and you know how I feel about keeping it 100 with you all. And I felt no better way to do that than to have one of my dearest best friends, Brandon Walker, on, and I'm gonna let him introduce himself in just a moment. But I've done episodes by myself before and love them. And I always, get great feedback from you all that you all, appreciate those just as much as me talking to guests. However, when it comes to your own shit, sometimes you have a tendency to kind of hold back a little bit, and I did not want to do that. And so my great friend, brother, you may say, Brandon Walker, you probably heard me speak to him, speak about him before, but we've been friends for over 20 years, and this is what he does for a living. He is an amazing journalist, and I wanted him to come on and interview me. So it's going to be a switch of the turntables today. And so I'm excited to see what questions he has for me. I'm excited for you all to hear this content, and I'm so looking forward this season. I'm so looking forward to just getting back on the mic with you all. But I didn't want to censor myself, and I know that he knows me well. He's been there throughout all of this journey, so I know his questions are going to be good and juicy, and what you want to know over what's been going on over this year, good and bad, the ugly, the amazing moments, all of that. We're going to try to squeeze that in today for this episode. But first, I wanted to actually, let me go ahead and have Brandon introduce himself. Hey, Brandon.
Hi there. No pressure whatsoever.
No pressure at all. You're the professional. I'm so glad that you could join me today. Can you give the listeners a little bit about, who you are, where you come from?
Yeah, I'll start with from where I come. I'm from New Orleans, baby, as you know so well. Friends for 20 years, went to sibling high schools and then to college together, and wherever else. So from New Orleans, I am a reporter based here in Houston, working for one of the news stations here. I've been here just under 7 years, and have worked as a reporter for a long time now. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my professional introduction, I guess I'll say. And everything else, when you do this job and everything that you do every day is out there on the internet, I'm not going to keep talking about me because you can Google it and there you have it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure the listeners are going to really appreciate how you curate this conversation. And I'm so excited to myself as well because, y'all, I had to pour my glass of wine. I had to burn my sage because I haven't had this conversation before. And we're going to jump right in. We are going to just jump right in and talk about, what is healing? That is a word that is heavily thrown around and heavily convoluted. And I'm sure we'll get to this, but one of the things that I have been trying to do is pick up more reading. And one of the books that I am actually reading right now is on. It's called "You Are Your Best Thing: Vulnerability, Shame, Resilience, and the Black Experience." It's an anthology, edited and written by different authors, but edited by Tarana Burke and Brene Brown. And while reading this, one of the essays was called "The Wisdom of the Process" by Prentice Hemphill, and she does a lot of work in healing and a lot of work in the Black experience. And towards the end of reading this essay, it had a profound impact on me, and I thought about it in regards to this conversation today and wanted to share with you and thought that it would be a good way for us to jumpstart this conversation. And at the end of her essay, after talking about the purpose of healing, the purpose of restoring the Black experience, the purpose of redefining this, she says, "I don't think healing follows directions. The truth is that I don't know who we become when we heal. None of us does. That is the wisdom of the process. I know that when I opened up to myself, I became more of me. I became curious, porous. I cried more and I argued less. I knew where my fight belonged and where it didn't. I knew where I belonged and I insisted on remaining there. In healing, we become more of ourselves. We move away from controlling our expressions, insisting on who we will be, gatekeeping to manage our insecurities, and we discover who we are after all this time, after all these breaks, with all this joy. I am proposing a process, not a destination, a necessary process for us to become, a process that will fundamentally reshape us and our relationships, and will have to, by its very magnitude, reshape the world." I read that essay and I immediately I just connected with it on a different level. And so I wanted to start off the conversation in that way. And I'm actually going to give the mic over to Brandon because, I'm going to let him guide this conversation. But I hope you all are excited as I am. And yeah, we're going to jump right in. Brandon, I'm leaving the mic over to you.
Again, I say no pressure because you're so great at this. And this is one of those situations where I can say for the first time legitimately, long time listener, long time fan, in this case, first time caller. So here we go. And in you saying that you wanted to start off with that quote, I took a few notes. And one of the sentences started out with the phrase, "When I opened up to myself." And so I'm curious, what was the drive that then encouraged you to, quote, open up? And why was there presented a need for you to feel that it was necessary to do so?
Mm, okay, so let's just dive right in there. Last year has was definitely one of the hardest years that I have experienced professionally and personally, and I'll dive into both of those separately. And saying initially that last year I went through a divorce. I went through a divorce, and really that's just ending only a shy of a couple months ago. And for those of you all who didn't know, I was married. I was I was married and for 3 years. And we went through a really painful, difficult journey in that. And for me, it was really challenging to figure out how to find my personal footing again and my professional footing again. At the same time of going through a divorce, I was actually going through a very pivotal point in my professional career. So this is a time where you all heard me. The reason why I ended the podcast last year, ending season 2, is because I was beginning the journey of tackling dissertation, tackling the final steps of me finishing this PhD program. So while going through divorce, I wrote an entire dissertation on trauma disclosure. I actually utilized 2 episodes from this podcast and talked about the process of trauma disclosure, which was very difficult in going through a traumatic experience and writing about what that looked like from the perspective of Black women and healing. In addition to that, I had to apply for internship. That is the very last step that you need before being granted the official PhD before graduation. I applied for internship, had to interview all over the country for this position, and got my first top selection at a VA here in South Texas. And so then I had to move. All of these things were happening at the same time, and so this last year, it pushed me to propel into the question of what does it look like to find my footing? What does it look like for me to begin and continue this healing process? And what does it look like for me to share those very vulnerable and very difficult those levels? And so yeah, that is, I think that is the precipitous of how we ended up in this conversation today.
Which is an interesting point, because the basis of the show is about establishing transparency, to have these conversations. And the quote you presented talked about healing and reaching that juncture where the gatekeeping ceases, and ceases was the word that was used there. In your setup to where you've been, you mentioned that you were married, but then you also said that some of the listeners may not know that. And so when you said that, I thought, well, why? And then I went through my library of each of the episodes I've listened to, which is every episode of the podcast thus far, and you didn't talk too much about the marriage. So why?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Y'all, this is why I didn't interview my damn self, because Brandon knows.
You get the messy TV reporter here who's
yes,
just prodding.
Oh, but this is why. So I didn't talk about my marriage as much. I didn't share about it. I didn't have a wedding. I didn't have the fairy tale idea of what it looked like. I was actually married to a woman. I do identify as bisexual, and I was married to, and we had a whole episode on that, but didn't even talk about the personal implications of how that has shown up in my life. And one of the difficult things is that, that relationship changed a lot of things for me, as far as like how I felt things should be presented when it came to my family, how things should be presented when it came to my friends. And so I carried a lot of shame and secrecy around the relationship, and therefore did not talk about it as much. And these are things that a lot of times I didn't even start investigating and questioning for myself until it started coming to an end, into a halt. And, for those of the people that know me, know that, that's not who I am. Like, that's the exact opposite of who I am. I love to talk. I love to open up the conversation. I love to be transparent. And in that relationship, there was a history of not feeling like I could be my full authentic self.
Why?
And because I feel like in certain relationships, we vacillate between who we want to be and who the other person wants us to be. And that is something that I struggle with in that relationship. And I struggle still now with being true and honest about who I am and how I want to present to the world, and what does that look like in the context of other people. And I think as Black women, a lot of times we have this idea about, I have to be a certain type of way, I have to present a certain type of way. And you're right. The foundation of this show is to negate those respectability politics, negate that in a way that allows us to have the conversation and be really free about what that looks like. And so part of the restrictions of that relationship really wasn't in alignment with my core beliefs of like me being fully transparent in who I am. And not to say that that was any reflection of the person, but that was the respectability politics that I carried. That was the shame that I was taught as a Black woman, as a young Black woman coming from New Orleans in the South, where anything that is aside from a heterosexual relationship is therefore not okay. It's not acceptable. It's not something that you put on the forefront. And that is something that I had to unlearn. That is something I had to challenge. And so part of that is as acknowledging that even in my passion, even in something so delicate as my baby, as the Black Jezebel podcast, I still had to struggle with being my true self. And when it came to something as delicate as my marriage or my relationship. And so, that is why this season, like I joke with my friends, I'm like, this about to be a Mary J. Blige album, because we are unlearning together and we are challenging ourselves together to have these conversations that are uncomfortable. Like, like uncomfortable is not even even a fitting word, but it's important because it's the awareness piece that begins that conversation. And so that is why I'm here. And that was the starting aspect of it, kind of acknowledging that, hey, like, I'm not really being truthful with myself. I'm not really being truthful in this process. And this is not, I deserve to be able to have that experience.
Well, we will get it percolating in this dancery, as she so eloquently sang for us some 20 years ago, however it was.
Shout out Mary J. Blige.
Always. You talk about, it's interesting because you've had time to process this and you're also someone who does this. And so certain details and how we shape our own narratives and what we want people to know, despite our honesty, may leave out some specifics. And so in your setup there about what you were experiencing and why that transparency was a challenge and what you were experiencing, what wasn't, I would say, perhaps, I'm curious as to the dimension of family and having that conversation with family about the fact that not only are you married, but you married a woman and this is our life together. And that was something that they did not like. And so I'm curious as to how that then shaped who you were in that moment and thus the relationship in its early stages.
Whew. Heavy hitter. Yeah. Family, we are instructed at a young age that not only is family comes first, but as a Black woman, part of your role is to be obedient. And when you go against the grain, when you go against, the elders, like we like to call them, those of knowledge, those that have, you Big Mama did it this way, this is the way you're supposed to do it. This is how it's supposed to look. When you go against anything of that nature, you're going to experience internal and external resistance. And that is what happened for me. I had very, very, very difficult, challenging conversations with my family members the early parts of my marriage. So much so that I didn't talk to my mom for a whole year after I was married. I didn't talk to my sister for months because we didn't have a wedding. It was just us, and I robbed them of that experience, and I robbed myself of it. And I think I know that I carried some guilt, carried a lot of shame, and carried a lot of, well, if I had to go through all of this against my family, then I got to make it work. I got to figure out how to make this relationship work, even if that requires that I silence myself, even if that requires that I shut off aspects of myself. And that was the beginning of the relationship, and that was the beginning of the end. Not even the relationship, but the marriage. That was the beginning towards the end, because we can't really.
So it was at the point where it wasn't going to work even before it officially started, after you said I do.
Honey, sometimes when the ancestors say, you knew better, but you did it anyway.
Yeah. I hear that every morning.
You knew better, but you did it anyway. I did. I knew that I thank God for the gift of discernment, and it's something that I challenge myself on when I think about the right and the wrong ways of doing things. I knew before that it wasn't going to work. I also knew I had to do it anyway in order to get to the place that I am now. And now in that place, I can see why. The lessons that I learned, the getting deeper into myself in a way that I wasn't before. And that has been a part of the process. And I was in my office the other day and I saw a quote that said, there's no right way to do life. There is a way that works and a way that doesn't. And that really stuck with me because I think a lot of times for me and all of my other listeners out there who, suffer with anxiety or suffer with, just trying to be a planner and trying to make sure things are all in alignment as, like we say with the universe and trying to be successful, whatever that looks like personally and professional. I struggle with a lot of the decisions of like, what is the right decision to do? What is the right, what is going to be the right thing? And I think part of my process of healing has been fighting and battling in the release of that and the release of the expectation that that any decision is right or wrong, because it isn't. We're going to learn, we're going to grow no matter what that is. But what does that process look like? So what does it look like for you to surrender to that process? And so when I look back on the implication of a family and even the full circle moments of having to come back to those conversations and say, hey, I know you told me not to do it, but I did it and it didn't fail. And I still need love. Hey, like, what does that look like? Because I had to humble myself on so many occasions. I had to humble myself and acknowledge that, sometimes other people see things that you don't see. And sometimes other people, offer things that, may be receptive to you, but it's up to you in your own journey. It's up to you to pick up the bag and run with it, right? It's up to us to say, okay, I'm going to take this, but I'm not going to take that. Or I'm not going to take that at all. Or I'm going to, I'm going to listen to this piece of advice, but I'm not going to listen to that. Or, or it's up to us to ignore it. Oh, that worked for you in your marriage, but that doesn't apply here. And all of those things are choices, not right or wrong. But in every choice, we have the aftermath. And I think, I had to eat a lot of that. I had to go back to my family and saying, these are the things that I still need from you. And that does not include shaming. That does not include targeting, the decisions that I made. But yes, I would have liked things to look different, but it hasn't. And I have appreciated, my family being there, open arms. I have appreciated that. But, it also brings up a lot of shit, too, because we still deal with homophobia in the Black community. So it's also other conversations that require, you to have throughout. And I feel like that was a lot of conversations throughout the scope of those relationships that all had an impact ultimately on my marriage. And yeah.
And family ultimately did, or at least as far as the aesthetics, the window dressing is concerned, come around and be there with you. For instance, there was a housewarming where everyone was present and it was one big happy family. Within the context of the nuclear family, you and your wife, with the challenges that you were witnessing with your family and trying to make this relationship work, what was being received from your perspective on the other side during all of this at the fore when it was presented to you, hey, we're married, and your family didn't like it?
From my side?
From your now ex-wife's perspective, what was that person's response to what you were experiencing? And moreover, what were they experiencing, and how did that then create the stew that was your new dish?
I mean, honestly, and I can't speak as much from her perspective, but I know from my experience.
Just what you witnessed, what you felt.
From my experience, I think the reason why I struggle with that so much is because she was not disclosing to her family about our relationship or our marriage. And that didn't happen. Some members of her family didn't even know that we were married until almost a year after we were married. And, that was very hurtful and challenging for me because it almost had this underlying essence of like, shame and stigma but it was covered up in the, well, that's just not their business, or we just aren't that type of family. Everybody's family is different. And I get that. However, having been on the opposite side of that, having, spoken to and disclosed and, communicated with all of the people in my family about this decision that I chose to make with this person that I loved, and not having had that reciprocated was very hurtful. And I know that made me change the way in which I viewed family and I viewed connection. And so, yes, my family, I think that was the one thing that we did have where, a housewarming and both family members, there were individuals from both sides of the family that showed up in support. And that was very nice. But I always question, is that genuine or not? Is that sustainable or not? And, some of those answers I'll never know. However,
but does it matter if you're getting what you need for fulfillment at home?
Right. I don't feel like it does, but I think that I wasn't getting the validation that I needed, that it was going to be as supportive as, people say you get married, you leave the nest and you become one. And from that one person, you can't get everything you need, but you get a great deal amount of that support, validation, that encouragement that, things are being different. And that, was present sometimes, but not always. I don't feel like I felt that as when it came to the joining of family. Yeah.
I'm curious, how did all of this make you not a partner? Because a partner is a word that we can use if you're not legally married. In this case, you were. So how did that make you as a wife? How did that shape your perspective as a wife?
I don't think I really had many examples about what a Black wife was supposed to look like, what a Black wife that was bisexual was supposed to look like, what a Black wife who, was bisexual and pursuing a higher education degree and doing all of these other things that require different aspects of her identity and her personality, what that example looked like. I found myself trying to figure it out every day. And that's challenging when you are also trying to be true and authentic yourself. I found myself having a lot of questions for myself and not always safe spaces to always process them or even get the feedback or answer back from within myself, because I felt like I didn't have it figured out. I didn't know what the blueprint was because I hadn't seen it before. I had not seen, I've seen other people in my family that were married to the opposite sex, and that, they, had traditional gender roles that we would see in the Black family. And some would argue that is, the blueprint that we should use, but some would argue that we should throw that out of the window and be more progressive in creating our own idea of what marriage should be. And I feel like a lot of times I tried to take that perspective. I tried to take that perspective because the regular blueprint did not fit for me. But in taking that perspective, that then means that there is an element of creating something that may not exist. Because even when we see same-sex lesbian marriages or same-sex gay relationships, a lot of times what we see in the media is they're white, they're not Black. There are not these additional cultural dynamics, that racial dynamics, racial stigma, racial shame that's embedded in the Black experience. We don't get all of those elements. And so it then becomes a jigsaw of well, what does it look like if you do not know what it's supposed to look like? Yeah.
And that's why I asked that question with the specific terminology of wife, because I was curious as to how you would pick it up and use that particular vocabulary within the context of the dynamic with which you were dealing. So then thus, I'll ask, how did that experience shape your actions as a partner?
Mm-hmm. I think that it challenged me on many ways than one. It challenged my idea about, what are the things that I should do versus what I shouldn't do. And I think, looking back, I've learned a lot about communication and what it looks like to have authentic communications with yourself in order to have authentic communications with the other person. And honestly, I think that, a lot of times I tried to rely on the fact that we had a base level of friendship and rather than an actual relationship, because a lot of times it did not feel like it was an actual relationship. It felt like I relied on a lot of other people in my life to get the things that I needed. I think at one point I convinced myself that I wasn't going to be able to possibly get everything I needed from one person, which I still feel like, we have multiple people in our lives that show up for us in different ways, whether that's best friends, whether that is, family members, companions, different people that show up for us in addition to romantic partnerships to help us navigate and feel more fulfilled in life. But I think that the actual behaviors of how I showed up and how I demonstrated wife was something that I never mastered. I didn't know what that shit was supposed to look like. I didn't know what it was supposed to involve because I had no blueprint or no roadmap. But I know a lot of times I kind of, did the easy route of traditional gender roles. Shit, I cook, so I love to cook, so I cook. I love to, spend time with people that I care about. So we had a lot of parties. We planned a lot of social gatherings.
I was there for many of them.
Okay, so it's certain things that I feel like I did really well, and other things I know I struggle with. But again, I feel like some of those things I'm still unraveling in this healing journey, and having those conversations with myself about what that looked like and what it didn't look like, or even just what I want it to look like in the future, in future partnerships.
You said that you had to rely on other people to get what you needed. Rely and need are two very interesting words there. And so, within the context of a partnership where you've got someone on whom you rely for so many things to get what you need, and then thus what that person needs as well, as far as the reliance is concerned, were the two of you faithful? Did that at all impact the relationship?
I mean, that definitely impacted the relationship. You come into a relationship initially having the conversations about having a different type of relationship. As a bisexual Black woman, I was always clear about not wanting to have a standard traditional marriage. That was part of a conversation before we got married. And, a part of relationships is a lot of times people agree to things that they are not comfortable with because they are comfortable with being with that person. And
Who
that was
agreed to what? Are you talking about you or the partner?
I'm talking about both of us. But specifically because I was the person that was advocating towards or not advocating, but having a conversation about having a non-traditional marriage. So having a non-traditional marriage was something that I was always going to be promoting, and I think initially she agreed upon it and was not okay with it. So what that looks like is, eventually you coming to the realization that this is something that's not going to be a good fit for you. And and I do think that ultimately that had a huge impact in it, because how I identify sexually is very different than my views on doesn't align with a traditional monogamous standard marriage. And I'm okay with that. And I knew that beforehand, which is why I try to advocate and have those conversations. But, I also have been in situations, and in this particular case, where my partner agreed and, thought the relationship would look something different than what it was.
So did the communication evolve then, where the intentions perhaps of what that person thought she was getting wasn't what she had, and your experience was pretty similar? Did the communication evolve along with the emotions?
No, I don't think the communication evolved. I think that's the deficit. I think that, in relationships, we have conversations when we want to have conversations, and everyone doesn't feel comfortable having the more difficult conversations. And so, an evolving conversation exists of both people continuously showing up with presenting new ideas and presenting new solutions and presenting how they currently feel at that moment. And that doesn't always happen in a marriage. That doesn't always happen if both people um, aren't willing to be fully transparent at that time. And so, no, I don't think that the conversation continuously evolved, but the issue never went anywhere. And we find that a lot of times that, especially in difficult relationships or situations, that we just stop talking, or we just stop having the difficult conversations, and we find ourselves telling, and I'm speaking in general, but we find ourselves having conversations where, oh, well, you've been with the person for so long, you should just be able to figure it out, or you all have been together for so long, it'll work its way out. But
what does that mean even?
Exactly, because that's not realistic.
Exactly. So then, what marked the turning point where it was then established, one, this is not working, and it was received on both sides of the table here?
I think the pandemic definitely had a huge role to play in that, because when you are in a place where you're locked up in a house and not actually communicating and not having the connection that you desire from a person, then that kind of spirals the end. Um, it was at a point where I thought that we would be able to maintain a friendship and be able to, heal together in that way. But that wasn't the course. That was not the course, or the trajectory of the ending of my marriage. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I know at the end of the day, we both deserve to live in the truth that we have, and we both enjoy it, deserve to have, just meaningful, fulfilling relationships. And that came to an end. Did I learn a lot from that marriage? Absolutely. Did last year propel me to be a better listener, a better researcher, a better podcaster, a better therapist? Absolutely. Will I continue to take the lessons from that experience to help allow me to be more empathetic to my friends and my family and my clients who experience traumatic and turmoil experiences in their relationships, or just don't have it figured out? Of course. Was it easy? Fuck no. Am I still, do I still struggle with what it looks like to be healed or to heal throughout, after divorce? Through, did I struggle through dissertation? Were there moments where I questioned myself and experienced imposter syndrome as I'm trying to make these huge milestones in my life? Absolutely. But I think that that's why it's part of this process. And I think that's why I continuously challenge myself to have these conversations, because these are the moments in which we initiate change, and these are the moments in which we initiate growth. Yeah.
And we're building up to the point where we get to where your healing process begins within the context of this relationship. For the audience who may be wondering, why haven't we gotten there yet? I just want to pull the nuances out of you, because the fact of the matter is, while you were experiencing all of this, you were churning content that dealt specifically with what you were dealing and with what others were dealing, and some very specific, very painful, very colorful nuances that spoke directly to you.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, while on one end, we are being open and asking questions of your guests who poured their hearts out, and you did too. You shared a lot in those conversations. But on the other, you're dealing with an experience that ultimately turned traumatic for you, or at least, as you said, actually began traumatic. So how are you, Tamara Jamila Holt, put your government name out there, able to then thus coexist between these two realities that, are there together on the journey that is your life, but are very much so disparate? So where were you within the context of that battle that was brewing?
One of the things that, I won't even say is specific to me, but is highlighted among Black women is the idea of resiliency. We cannot experience pain without the body naturally inclined to figure out how can we release or relieve some of that suffering. And so that's why we think about the essence of pain and pleasure as one. For me, I struggled a lot with that, and part of my resiliency was throwing myself into my work. I had deadlines. I had expectations and things that I had to meet. I was writing 12 hours a day to finish my dissertation. I was reminding myself of the purpose of the work that I was doing, to engage in, because there were moments where I did not see it hopeful. There were times in which I felt, you know, what am I doing all of this for? How can I convince other people that they should be doing the work, and I don't feel like I have enough energy to get out of the bed to even start doing the work. So that required me to tap out of myself and lean and rely on those of others. So I started therapy. I met an amazing Black woman who's a therapist, and she started working with me every week, guiding me, encouraging me, uplifting me. I was very transparent with my friends, you included, about the struggle that I was going through. I cried over and over again. I wrote, I read, I walked, I sat with myself in moments where I didn't want to be alone. And these are the things that reminded me that I needed to be able to continue and push through to those deadlines. And so a lot of times that process of that healing didn't even feel evident until after the deadline was met, because again, as a Black woman, I have all of these set standards that I've placed for myself of like, this is the expectation, I got to get it done, right? And yet I'm still hurting. So what does it look like to be able to meet these expectations while still show up for myself? This self-care, right? We use this buzzword. But I had to realize that it needed to be a yin and a yang. And so I was pushing myself further than I ever pushed myself before. However, I was still allowing room to figure out what resiliency looked like in the essence of pleasure. What does it look like to take time and say, you know what, I'm done for today. I'm going to have a glass of wine or a bottle. Okay. What does it look like for me to get on? You know what? I've been working all this time. I'm going to book a trip. I'm going to do this. I'm going, whatever that looked like, I try to continue to allow myself to have that space. And
I
I'm
understand
still
that long
struggling with
use
it.
days employ me to just put a straw into the wine bottle, so you're not
Just a
alone
straw.
here. Right.
Because what are we doing? So I think that is the only way that those two things were able to coexist.
But to push you for a second on that, and yes, there was access to what you were experiencing. I will say, though, that when things seemed to have taken a drastic turn within your relationship, where it seemed as though y'all didn't like being together, wherein I was someone who was over there all the time, I suddenly was not.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, when I was there, it didn't feel good being there because you could feel the tension.
Mm-hmm.
So why was that? Why was there a need to present that maybe we're going through something, but we're working on it, but the energy of the room begged to differ?
Oh, baby, we didn't all had that auntie that said, you better fix your face. Okay, we didn't all had that that moment of, you know, the personal is, amongst you and your partner, and it shouldn't be shared. It shouldn't be, don't air out the dirty laundry. All of these things, why is it taking me so long to actually have this conversation? And why is it so uncomfortable for me to have this conversation, right? Because I'm challenging myself in a way that goes against the grain of what I am taught, that goes against the grain of respectability politics of your personal business is yours. So that then aligns with fix your face moments. My ex actually used to say that, fix your face. We're going to have a fix your face moment. And I cringed every single time.
What did that mean?
Because what that means is if you are presenting yourself to someone else in a public spiel, then they shouldn't be able to tell that there's any unrest. They shouldn't be able to tell that, you ever see, well, shit, everybody then probably seen What's Love Got to Do with It, Ike and Tina. Ike and Tina had a whole full out brawl in that damn limo. And fix their little self. She ain't do that good of a job, but took their ass into that hotel and booked that room and act as if nothing was altered. That is the root of respectability politics. That is the root of I have to present myself in a way that is not going to defame myself, my people as a Black person, that is going to allow me access to that which I've been told that I do not have access to. And in order for me to gain access to these spaces, whether how personal they are be, so that then, and that's the difficult part of respectability politics, is that we're not talking about just work relationships or colleagues or it gets to the point where it ingrains so far deep into your personal relationship with friends as you having to present yourself in a certain way. And that is something that I didn't agree with. I don't necessarily align with. And so the energy that you felt was a shift of, you want us to do something one way and I want us to do something the other way. And it's just not necessarily going to work. And I feel like that is a challenge that we often experience as Black people of what does it look like for us to be experiencing all of this discomfort internally, but externally having to show face, externally having to code switch, if you like, into what is, this is what I'm presenting to the outside world. This is what I'm presenting to myself in the mirror. Okay. Because some of the most difficult conversations are those that you have within and for yourself in the mirror. We have that mastered. As Black people, we have code switching mastered to a T, and that is an act of survival. It's an act of survival. So part of the healing, one, is awareness that that's what's happening, that that's what you're doing. Two is the acknowledgement that it's not just affecting you, it's affecting other people that you care about. Because they can see, they can read the energy, they can read the room, they can feel the difference. And then three is the action. Okay, so now that you have the awareness and you have the acknowledgement, what's the action behind it? What are you going to do to then move towards greater transparency of living your true self, right? And we usually get caught up in one of those first two steps to the point that we don't usually move towards the action, which is why it's uncomfortable. This work that we're doing is uncomfortable. The journey of healing and processing is uncomfortable, and most people get caught up in that.
The Tina reference, and I will employ the audience to read both Tina, the initial memoir, which led to the movie, What's Love Got to Do with It, and then a later memoir that she wrote within the 2010s that was really good. As a matter of fact, I read it while I was staying at the house with you all after my accident because I had nothing else to do other than be in pain, relying on my medicine to come and the smoothies that you would make for me to make sure that I had something in my stomach because I couldn't eat anything. Praise God for you. But all of that to say that scene that you mentioned, Tina writes about at that point working up the strength through the journey that she had been through to know that was something that she was never going to accept again. And so in that car in Dallas, Texas, that's when all of that went down, and it was decided then that this was no more. So then for you, what was it then that made you understand that this is not working? And I have another question to follow that up with, but I want you to answer that first, and perhaps you'll answer my next question in it.
And this is hard for me. But we did have a moment of domestic violence. We had a moment of domestic violence last January, and that was the turning point for me, that I knew that this would not continue. It would no longer be something that I would be able to do.
You remember the month, last January?
Yes, my entire life, I have fought the struggle of what it looks like to be a woman and not have the same strength of someone other than you. I experienced, my mother struggled in relationships of domestic violence. My sister struggled with relationships of domestic violence. And I was always the person that was like, you can play with anybody else, but you're not going to play with me. That was my mentality. I never thought that would be a part of my relationship. And when it was, it broke me in a certain instance, a certain thing, something in me broke. And something in me knew, like you referenced, Tina, that was something that was, regardless of the reason, and I won't speak much in detail, but something in me knew that was the end. That was the end, and that was, very, very difficult for me, and even now hard to admit, because I pride myself in being someone that is so strong that I can navigate even the most challenging things. And part of my journey has been allowing myself to be vulnerable and allowing myself to be honest about real life pain. Like, we are really, man, life is hard. We are really out here doing the very best that we can. And this is why, again, I could not have had this conversation by myself, because I would not have challenged myself in this way. And so I appreciate you for this. But it is part of the journey, because in that moment I knew this goes against everything that I believe in. This goes against everything that that the Black Jezebel podcast represents, that I represent as, TemaraToday, the advocate, the agent to liberation, the Black women's empowerment, sexual healing journey. It goes against all of that, and I have to step into a healing and a season of being true to myself, and it was that moment I knew I had to do that.
Yet it was not you who filed for divorce.
Mm-mm. Nope.
Talk about that.
Even through all of that acknowledgement, something in me still wanted to try. I still was open to couples therapy, individual therapy. Still was open to fighting. And I'm so thankful that my ex was strong enough to say, no, we both deserve something different. Yeah.
Is that hindsight, or was that the experience you felt when it was presented to you?
It was the experience I felt when it was presented to me. Yep, at that moment.
And the two of you had been separated at that point, living in the same house, but in separate bedrooms. But at that point, it was then established we really have to go physically our separate ways.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about that journey and figuring out what this new life will be, when the life that you had created for yourself and started essentially in pain has become even more painful.
Yeah, I think you struggle with the moments of feeling like a failure, feeling like, damn, I damn, they gave up my family for this and it didn't work. I struggle with that. I struggle with, still knowing that this was happening at the very moment that I was proposing dissertation, the very moment that I was taking licensure exam, the very moment that I was applying for internship. All of these things were happening within a 3-month span. Like, the timing it could not have been worse. So having to move out of my house that I cultivated into a home, and take me and St. Claude, my spirit animal, to, a 1-bedroom apartment where, just completely out of my sense of normalcy, it was more than difficult. It was more than challenging. And if it hadn't been for the support of the people around me, including my friends and family, I don't know if I would have been able to do that alone. So it was very, difficult, to say the least.
I've poked significantly on the emotional side of you. How did your professional you then take note and react to all of what you had been experiencing?
I think I poured all of that into my dissertation and more. And I will have another episode, a follow-up episode after this, discussing and diving into dissertation and what that looked like, and using those 2 episodes, and how, we talked about trauma disclosure. But, part of the disclosure aspect is the comfortability in telling the story, the comfortability in being able to say, I trust you enough. I trust you enough to share that this is my experience, and that you believe that this is my experience. And so all of my personal experiences was poured into that. It was poured into that. I say it all the time, like, although, applying for internship is very difficult, it's very anxiety driven, but I was going through so much. I was showing up as my full self in those interviews. I had nothing else to give. I was giving you, this is what it is. This is why I want this. This is why I love trauma work. This is why you need me.
And nothing to lose too at the same time.
Because I didn't have anything to lose, and at that point I didn't have much more to give. And so, and some would argue that really paid off. Like, I mean, I was fortunate to be in a place where I knew I was going to get my number one spot, and I did, and that was amazing. So it came off in a way that pain birthed a resiliency that I didn't, before starting, I mean, I knew it was there, but I didn't know what it looked like. And I didn't know what it looked like until, getting that opening letter of having been selected for my top internships. I didn't know what it looked like until, completely defending my dissertation that cultivated 2 episodes of the Black Jezebel and brought it into Black psychology, women research on trauma, and having my committee and all of my family members and the people that I love clap for me as they say, "Congrats, Dr. Holt, you passed." I didn't know what resiliency looked like until that moment. You're muted.
Fat fingers. I didn't get to it. No, I do this, and we can cut this out or whatever you want to do when we edit. But I mute myself when you're talking so that like none of the residual audio picks up, so that it's clean for you. But that happens to me when I'm recording news interviews on Zoom, and I start talking like you're muted. It's like, I'm sorry. So all right, 3, 2, 1. I lost my train of thought. No, I know my question, but I wanted to, let's see.
And we're running at about 55, so we want to do about 5 more minutes and then move into Black Jezebel.
Okay. Ooh, I'm sorry. Okay. So here's the question. So before we go on, I mean, am I delving? Am I like, is this not
this
going?
Is great.
Okay.
This is great.
Okay.
Just keep
All
it
right.
going.
So we'll pick it up again in 3, 2, 1. So we've established a timeline without the dates and figures, so to speak, but we now know what you were experiencing, and we've developed the narrative arc based on that timeline. But if we were to establish where healing began for you, where would that be along the timeline?
I think it began the first time that I actually sought out therapy and realized there was something outside of myself that I could do. And actually,
while you were still married.
Yes, while I was still married. Right after the incident of domestic violence, I sought out a therapist, and I dove into that head first. In addition to creating a healing book club with 2 of my close friends, Miana Graves, who has been featured on our podcast a couple of times, and Darlinda Miner, who I will have come on this season. We started a healing group, and one of the first books that we read was Grow Yourself Back Up. And that book was life-changing. That book was simply talking about the difficulties that we aren't always parented the same way. We are functioning in the eyes of our childhood wounds. And what does it look like to heal those childhood wounds in a way that allows you to show up in a more full, authentic adult version, knowing that you are responsible and you are capable of growing and leading yourself to what that full adultness looks like. And so it was in those moments where I feel like that healing journey started for me.
So within that healing journey, what was the realization that you realized? You said this early in the conversation that this isn't going to work pretty early on in the context of the relationship. And while you weren't the one who filed for divorce, what was it along that healing journey that made you confirm what you knew, and that was, this just isn't going to work?
I just think that it was a combination of many different things. And, part of being in like the book club and going to therapy, I realized that I was doing things and we weren't doing things together. I was doing things separately. She was doing things separately. We were coexisting, and it was not an interconnected thing. And I realized in that moment that, I wanted something greater. I wanted something different. I wanted something where I could really fully show up as my full authentic self, and all aspects of those things be joyous and highlighted. And that wasn't happening in that current state. So I knew that was going to be a transition out.
And I know we've got to wrap now, so I'll keep it I'll keep it just for I'm stuttering right now, so I'll, whatever. But I want to ask this next question for the audience, because I think there always has to be, and I'm just talking out of the edit. What can I use out of this specific question before we get into, and I'll ask you now. Do you want, is it, because I forget the question. Is it, what is the Black Jezebel moment? What is the question specifically?
Oh, the question is just going to be about, a moment.
Well, how do you ask it? And it's like, how do you want it to be produced? Do you want to ask that question, or do you want me to say, like, it's one of those situations where it's not my show, but asking the questions, I've got to ask you what is.
Okay.
Do you want that?
Yeah, that's fine. And then I'll ask you.
Right. You're right.
Yeah, so that's fine. But I was just gonna ask something along the lines of, like, what has healing looked like for you? What is healing? Maybe what does it feel like? Yeah. So I'll let you take that and create whatever kind of question.
Okay. 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 All right. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. So in talking about that healing journey, when did you feel okay?
I think I still struggle with what feeling okay looks like or feels like, but I think after I moved and have been getting settled into this new place, I'm now in San Antonio, where I don't have nothing around me but my damn thoughts and wine. Um, and I have been experiencing a lot of peace, and I feel like that for me has been looking like okay. Don't have it all figured out. This is definitely a journey and a process, but one of the moments was getting back to I was saying earlier, when I was unwrapping my mic and dusting off my headphones, since it had been so long since I've been talking to you all, I just smiled, and that joy was like, this is important. This is the important work. This is what you miss. This is what you love. This is what you thrive. And I'm so excited to jump back in season 3. And clearly, I mean, we started off ripping off the Band-Aid. So, that just gives you a inkling of what the season is gonna be like. But it feels like that. It feels like that the moments of peace, the moments of joy, that I'm allowing myself to stop and be aware of.
In your healing process and moving on from the relationship about which we've discussed for the past hour, I would say, is there anything that you would say to your now ex-wife right now about what you've learned, about what you know, about what you wish you would have said within the context of your relationship? Anything? Or is there any need for that to happen within the context of your healing experience?
I would say there isn't any need for that. I would say, that I'm thankful for the experience, and I'm thankful for the process. And I wish her nothing but health, healing, and blessings. At no point in this journey did I ever feel like she was a terrible person. I married her for a reason. We were on again and off again for 2 years. I mean, for 10 years, married for 3. And I always wish that for her and for her journey. And I hope that the things that she's doing is helping her and healing her as well. But I don't feel like it's a need. I feel like, my journey is mine, and that is separate from, any of my relationships in the past. And I want to continue to move forward in that way.
What do you hope your audience takes from this conversation and having a better understanding of what this show is about, and thus who you are?
I hope that those listening, that those will listen, will know that we are all trying to figure it out, including me, that sometimes it's important for us to unveil ourselves in ways that, are scary and daunting and challenging. And that, sometimes disclosure can bring healing. And that was one of my main discoveries in doing a dissertation, is that, life is traumatic. We experience traumatic things, but part of the healing process is disclosing and communicating with those that you love and trust, and knowing that on the other side of that, you are then evolving into a more authentic version of yourself. And so I hope that my listeners know that, hey, like, today you learned a lot more about Tamara. Today you learned um, about the humanness of me. You learned about the womanness of me. You learned about the authentic nature that, that has been brewing in inside of me, allowing me to propel into, you know, a different version of myself that I hope that you will continue to see in this process. I hope you will continue to see that in this podcast and all of the other ventures that I'm working on. That we are in this together. When I say we having a conversation, it's because I'm never going to ask you to do more and go deeper than I'm not willing and allow myself to do too. And I needed to show you that, and I needed to push myself. And I'm so grateful for, my dear friend and love Brandon for doing that, because he know good and goddamn well I was not gonna do it by myself. So, but that is a indication of, you don't have to do it by yourself. You don't have to go through this journey alone. And so that's why we're here. That is the foundation core of why I established and developed the Black Jezebel podcast, because we are on this journey together, and that includes me. So today, y'all got in the hot seat with me, and I hope y'all had y'all wine, because now I need to go put the straw in the bottle.
To borrow from my ignorant self after a long news day. So then, thus, I mean, how do you feel after sharing so much?
I feel great, and I feel that this is another inkling in the journey of healing for me. And I appreciate you.
Oh, well, I mean, you mean the world to me. So, I mean, that's, I mean, if I can sit here and ask a stuffy question, which is what I do for a paycheck, and here I am, and I'm joking there for the audience, because these were some very personal questions, and frankly tough for me to ask, because as you said at the beginning of the show, I was there to witness a lot of it, and so not necessarily as an actor within the relationship, as it were, because I wasn't, but just kind of on the sidelines and experiencing what it was for me to experience, what was presented for me to experience. And so that wasn't easy to ask those questions. Also not easy to ask this next question, which is frankly the hallmark of this show, and that is your power here within this show, and that is asking, what's your Black Jezebel moment?
Yes, yes. So we I've been so used to taking a backseat on this episode. Yeah, we do want to move into our Black Jezebel moment, and this is a time in the show where we share about what is related to the today's show. And in this season we're talking about healing, and I will go and talk about a moment in healing, where a moment in this process where I felt like I'm on the right path, or I'm on the right process, that things are going in alignment with me. And I will say that today was my Black Jezebel moment. It is very difficult when you are on any type of platform, whether that's personal or professional, to take off the hat and allow yourself to be barred open. That this has shown me, this conversation has shown me that I too deserve grace, and I too deserve compassion, and that I'm still willing to show up for myself, and I'm still willing to challenge myself when it hurts, when it's difficult, when I am potentially going to be, challenged in ways that I wouldn't have challenged myself. And so for me, this moment has shown me that this process is working, that this process is as ever evolving, and I'm excited for the next step. I'm so excited to be able to continue this journey with you all, and so I'm grateful for that. And I will turn the mic over and ask you, Mr. Walker.
I don't answer questions, baby. I just ask
that
them.
you have been. We answer questions today. I know yourself has been on many different types of healing journey, physically, mentally, even healing from really traumatic experiences, as far as having a traumatic car accident 2 years ago, where it was a close call, and healing has. So I asked you for your Black Jezebel moment. What does healing look like for you, and how has that shown up in your life?
Whew. My phone dropped unsolicited. I didn't even push it. That means the phone couldn't even deal with the weight of this conversation. But all of that to say, it began before my accident, which was very traumatic, and because you were there, and I'll never forget the story of hearing, because I was very coherent over the phone, and it wasn't until you saw me where you realized it was really bad, and I didn't know. But that was the turning point for me in understanding that this life that I live is mine to live, and I have to make choices that are all about the fulfillment of who I am, and then what that means going forward is other people will benefit as a result, so long as I'm present. So healing for me actually has much to do with that experience, but also the process has been just growing to accept the fact that, for one thing, I come from a long line of very strong Black women who I wouldn't be here today with whatever accolades may be had it not been for the sacrifices they specifically made and continue to make today. I'm thinking of my grandmother who's still alive right now. My mom has passed away. My maternal grandmother has passed away. And I say that in thinking about my mother, who had me at 17 years old, ultimately went through school, became a pharmacist. But despite achieving those professional benchmarks, she did that. Never got to see the fruits of her labor personally, because she had 3 children, right, that she had to take care of. She was the primary breadwinner in her family. The relationship with her husband, my dad, was not great, but they were children when they were brought in this union together. So how do you expect it to be great? No excuse of actions. But I understand now, through having a near-death experience and learning then that who you are and what you experience is how you want to define it, that sometimes, your success is built on, not sometimes, most of the time, particularly if you're talking about us as Black people, it's built on the trauma, the sweat, the blood, the tears of so many people. And that's not a generation or two ago. That's very much so your parent. That's very much so your sibling. You've seen it. And I think the breakthrough moment is acknowledging that you've seen it, and you bore witness to the generational trauma and what it means. And when you have privilege, as I have allowed, as I do have now, as someone who is a news reporter who has had a very successful career, it's your responsibility to work through that. So it has been counseling. It's also been just working on my physical health and running. And that's all part of the counseling experience, and knowing that, 1, you're not alone in this, but also 2, you stand on the shoulders of people whose trauma you witnessed firsthand, and developing or working through the process of your own issues. Maybe that's the wrong word, issues, because there's weight on yourself when you use that terminology, is understanding what they had to go through in order for you to have the privilege of figuring it out today.
Amen. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for doing this. I mean, this is season 3. Okay, y'all. Episode 1. We are recording this on the 2-year anniversary. And, I could not have been more grateful to be having this conversation with you about me. and about this year and this journey. And so I mean, if this gives you any indication how this season is going down, we are diving deep into healing, what it looks like, the ugly, the good, the growth, the uphill battles. We're having these conversations. We're talking about all of the different forms of what it looks like. And so I'm so excited to have jumpstart this season off with you and my dear friend Brandon Walker asking me these very intimate, vulnerable questions about my experience with divorce and my experience with healing. And so I cannot wait to get started with you all this season. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Black Jezebel Podcast. You can listen in on 8 different platforms from Apple Music to Spotify. Please take the time to give us a rating and review. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a rating, leave us some reviews. It helps other listeners find us. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, you can email me at the Black Jezebel Podcast at gmail.com or follow us on social media at the Black Jezebel Podcast. And again, I am your host, Tamara Today. And until next time, bye, y'all.